Ray descended from the top of the ceiling with grace. His feet slowly neared the ground as he controlled his descent through the flight skill, ensuring he did not repeat the same mistake as last time. As soon as he landed, he activated Danger Sense and Combat Application, both of whom were C-tier skills. Thanks to their average tier, they did not consume much mana, so he was operating on budget. Let's see just how many skills I can use in this round. Ray smiled as he maintained the flight skill. His feet did not touch the ground, and he slowly advanced through the 7th floor like a floating specter. His eyes were glowing brilliantly while his muscle-toned body was shrouded by the surrounding darkness. This didn't last very long, though. Perception, Farsight. Neither of these two skills were specifically for night vision, but they had their uses. Perception improved all his sensory abilities, while Farsight allowed him a long and wide range of vision. The latter skill was very limited due to the current darkness, but Ray was not worried at all. I can see a little, and that's all that matters. He had to consider situations where he couldn't fight in very bright areas. This could serve as training for such scenarios. This is strange, though. Why is this place dark? Shouldn't there be mana crystals here? As he proceeded, looking around him as he observed the walls and ceiling, these thoughts crossed his mind. If there were mana crystals, he would have even sensed them at this point. Ray decided to closely approach the walls, and that was when his senses picked him up, the minerals here that replaced the mana stones. These are. His eyes widened slightly as he placed his hand on one of the pointy rocks that covered the wall's surface. Orichalcum, I see now. Orichalcum were high-quality minerals that were known to be incredibly mana-resistant, so they were very useful for defense. These minerals were usually harvested to make weapons that could be used to directly counter incredibly powerful magic users or those who had skills that produced mana-based attacks. It had the opposite effect of mithril, which actually enabled more mana flow and sometimes amplified the quality. I learned all of this in the library. The rest of them don't know what they're missing out on. The moment Ray thought about the library, he remembered a face that made him smile a little. Ah, what are you doing, Ray? Now isn't the time to get distracted. He had work to do, and that was all that mattered. If the monsters here use these minerals, it's possible that a lot of my skills won't be as effective. Skills ran on mana, but there were certain skills that utilized mana externally. Those were the kind Ray was referring to. I have one saving grace, though. These are raw orichalcum ores. Usually, minerals were processed in the refinery in order to bring out their full potential. Using orichalcum as it was meant the users had to put up with a lot of its impurities, which meant its mana dampening qualities were limited. Ray liked that. So far, he had yet to encounter any monsters. That meant they did not build their civilization close to the entrance. Perhaps they were simply not expecting an intruder, or they were powerful enough to fend them off. Either way, Ray kept advancing, keeping note of his surroundings while all his senses were heightened. Let's see what what's this? Ray's danger sense began to tingle, and the direction that seemed to radiate the most danger seemed to be up ahead. Right now he was walking in what seemed like a long passageway, but there appeared to be a clearing just about 100 meters from his position. It probably led to a large expanse, considering the proposed topography of the floor. I see, so that's where they all are. Ray grinned. It seemed the monsters he was about to fight had more sense than he initially expected. Ray's grin grew even broader as he floated forward, expecting a treat. Gra. Grew. Two dark green creatures suddenly jumped out of nowhere and rushed at him. An ambush, ha, Ray thought as he watched them occupy both his left and right flank. They had sharpened weapons carved from the orichalcum, both in the form of long spears for better reach. Their dark slimy skin and their muscular build made Ray recognize them very easily. Hobgoblins. He had read that the second floor was populated by goblins before they were subjugated, so it made sense for their evolved versions to be down here. Hobgoblins were naturally bigger, stronger, and smarter than regular goblins. They also had areas of specializations, like humans had classes, and from the looks of the two who approached him, both seemed to be warriors. Orichalcum armor too, impressive. It was pretty rudimentary and downright primitive, but Ray could not deny that they were far more innovative than the monsters from above. Their eyes had evolved to the darkness, and their fluid motion made it clear they were aiming for his vitals. These were trained hobs, and if they were using orichalcum weapons, it was possible for them to pierce his defense. Well, depending on the defense. Force, Ray whispered under his breath. VWOOMMM. Both hobgoblins were forcibly stopped mid-air, and before they could say anything, their bodies were sent flying backwards. It was an almighty push that they could not resist. Boom. They crashed upon the stone walls that they sprang out from, completely stunned by the damage they had just received from an invisible force. Ah, did I kill them? Ray muttered to himself as he watched blood drip from their unconscious bodies. No, they're not dead, they're quite resilient. I guess the armor paid off, after all. However, they were already weakened by the hit they received. Ray decided it was probably best to finish him off with his next move. Heat vision. Instantly, his eyes began to glow red and a beam of hot light appeared from within it. VWUUUSHH. As he floated in the air, he sent the straight line of hot energy towards the helpless hobgoblins, finishing him off in a flash. Ha ha, I always wanted to try this at least once. The person he got the heat vision skill from also had icy breath, flight, super strength, and super speed as skills. It felt like the guy was going for a certain kind of build, but Ray didn't judge at all. It's pretty cool. Once he identified that the goblins were dead, he burned them up using fireball and took their monster core. I doubt I'd gain much experience from them. I guess I'll have to kill a bunch of them to gain a chance at leveling up. There was a good thing about goblins, though. Hob or not, these creatures moved as a large group. Their reproduction rate was also insane. Finding their hive means there's lots of them waiting for me here. And that meant tons of experiment. Who? Ray could sense a bunch more hobgoblins hiding close to the entrance of the clearing, waiting for him in ambush. They expertly used the darkness to cloak themselves, and from what Ray could tell, these hobs were very crafty. Something tells me they weren't always the apex predator here. It was very possible that they had managed to become the top of the food chain by conquering the dungeon themselves. That would make a lot of sense, considering how adept they were. Some are hiding on the ceiling, waiting to get to a drop on me, while others are underground. They were all prepared for him. It's too bad, though. Ray sighed as his eyes began to glow red once again. Single quote ellipsis. They aren't prepared enough. FSHUUUU. Beams of light traveled to the ceiling, instantly killing the hobgoblins that were stationed there. As the burning light seared through their flesh, they were decapitated by Ray's accurate aiming. He drew lines on their bodies using his heat vision, especially on their necks, so that their heads began rolling down long before the hobs even realized it. Tilde thud, tilde. Heads began to fall from the ceilings, and not long after, their bodies followed. You guys think you're smart. Sending those two to serve as decoys in order to test my strength, and also grant me the illusion that I have bested your guards, in the case that they failed to eliminate me. Perhaps that would work on anyone who hadn't read ahead, or who wasn't strong enough to overcome their strategy. But their plans didn't work on him because he had both qualities. He was too strong for them to properly poke at the depths of his power, and he was already well versed in hobgoblin tactics. At least, the simple ones like these. You never attack in small numbers, that's for sure. Ray could already notice fidgeting among the hidden hobs. It almost felt like they were in the middle of deciding whether to break out of their disguise and attack him, or whether to remain hidden and hope they weren't caught. Their chief probably instructed him to do this. The goblin culture was very hierarchical. The monsters followed their leader, no matter what. The chief's words were absolute. They probably don't want to defy the orders they were given, but they're also considering the current situation. Their survival instincts were probably screaming at them to take action before it was too late and they were killed off like mere cattle. This created a dilemma for them, causing the hobs to falter in their orders. How miserable. Allow me to choose for you. Ray grinned as his eyes glowed brighter than ever. FWISH. His beams of light cut through the air as they traveled to the targets, slicing through their bodies like hot knife through butter. K. Cree. G. Gruuk. Kra. The hobs began jumping out of their hiding positions, running away from Ray's intimidating presence. After encountering such an apex predator, they could already see how superior he was. The distance between his power and theirs was so abysmally huge that they had no choice but to defy the culture ingrained in them and simply follow their instincts. In essence, they chose flight. Where do you think you're going? Ray whispered, stretching one of his hands forward. Force. His skill, force, allowed him to do two major things: push and pull. Just earlier he had used the push quality. But now, VWUUUUM. The fleeing hobgoblins found themselves being drawn towards the slayer of their brethren. KK Cree. Perplexed expressions and whimpering sounds radiated from the dozen or so survivors. Like sniveling rats, they prayed for mercy that they knew would be denied them. This was the dungeon, a place where survival of the fittest had never been truer. Since they were weaker, it was only inevitable that they would die. K. Crew. FWISHH. Even if they didn't want to. As the last of the hobgoblins fell, their blood littering the ground at this point, Ray closed his eyes and heaved a sigh. I guess using heat vision for too long burns my eyes. It stings a little. His thoughts trailed. Most skills had drawbacks, duration periods, cooldown times, or some kind of requirement necessary to utilize them. Sometimes, these requirements were simply an ample sum of mana, but other times, it could be more complicated. I guess I should hold off using this skill for now. Ray smiled as he advanced forward. Ah, I forgot to take their cause. Doing this for dozens of hobgoblins was tedious, but Ray did so anyway. These were his rewards, and he wasn't going to let them go to waste even though he had no current use for them at the moment. Since his subspace had a limited amount of slots, Ray had brought sacks just for this moment. He would put all the monster cores into the sack, and put the sack into a slot. That way, more space was preserved. I'll probably just sell the monster cores in bulk when I can. For now, though, I can just stockpile them and think of it as insurance. With that thought on his mind, Ray picked the last monster core, deposited it in his sack, and proceeded to the opening that was now only about a dozen meters from him. I can only imagine how many cores I'll have to pick up once this is all over. Ray sighed to himself. He wished he had some kind of mechanism that allowed him to automatically farm the cores, but no such means existed in his arsenal. He wasn't omnipotent or anything. He just had a limited set of skills, with limited sets of abilities. Well, I've made it this far, might as well complete the job. Ray grinned and floated forward. I hope they make it entertaining for me. A putrid odor wafted past Ray's nose as he reached the entrance of the hobgoblin's base. The clearing was right before him, and he already felt sick to his stomach. Goblins aren't particularly known for their hygiene, but this is on another level. Ray crinkled his nose and narrowed his gaze. His heightened perception made it difficult for him to ignore the stench, so he just had to endure it. Whatever, let's just get this over with. Ray walked right past the entrance and soon found himself in a clearing. The hallway had been plenty large enough, but compared to the massive auditorium he now stood in, it might have as well been a tightened compartment. The expanse was large enough to contain thousands upon thousands of adult humans, with tons more room to spare. And occupying this space were a horde of hobgoblins waiting for him. About 300 of them. It's not surprising, considering how massive this place is. Ray thought that, but his eyes still widened at the sight of so many monsters in a single location. Hobgoblins were a cooperative race, but this number was considerably large for a civilization. External factors such as disease, predators, and other things ensure that goblin populations naturally dwindle. Adding that to their short lifespan, and they gave a perfect brew of why there weren't too many goblins in the world. These ones don't have predators any longer, so that greatly improves their numbers. The question, however, was what happened to the previous apex predators of this floor? Ray only had to look around for a brief instant to know the answer. His eyes twitched a little. He could see dog-like creatures, all of them in cages and pens, located in multiple corners of the massive clearing. They had wild looks in their eyes, and it was clear they were monsters, but something about them seemed domesticated. So the hobgoblins conquered the night wolves and turned them into their livestock. It was quite an efficient system, and Ray couldn't help but be impressed. Most unintelligent monsters would just go around killing their enemies if they got the chance to, but the hobgoblins were different. If I had to guess, they learned how to use the orichalcum here, and they launched a counterattack on the night wolves using their tricky strategy. Apex predators hardly ever needed to use dirty tricks to win. They were naturally stronger than their prey, so it was a given that they would emerge victorious. As such, the night wolves were probably extremely surprised by the resistance that the hobgoblins put up. The orichalcum was a very durable mineral, and it must have helped protect the hobs from whatever skills the night wolves were dependent on. Fast forward a few months, maybe years, and this became the natural conclusion. Ray smiled at the slimy green creatures before him. Instead of utterly eliminating the night wolves, the hobgoblins kept them alive. They must have realized they could use them as an endless source of food. This way, the hobs won't need to starve or feed off of dirt or one another to survive. From the way Ray saw it, these monsters were currently thriving. Unfortunately, they were yet to do anything about their hygiene. The feces of both hobgoblins and night wolves were dumped in a corner and left to rot. It was disgusting, and seeing it caused Ray to gag. The hobgoblins seemed to be enjoying themselves regardless, though. Perhaps their nose had even adapted to like the smell. I almost feel bad for ruining your paradise, but I'm sure you've had a good run already. Ray raised one of his hands. He could see the hundreds of hobgoblins draw their orichalcum weapons and look at him with fierce resolve. Their murderous gaze touched him slightly, but he wasn't letting up because of that. Why are they holding off on attacking me? Well, if I had to guess. Ray lifted his face and looked beyond the 300 hobgoblins before him. Sitting on a throne carved from pure orichalcum was a hobgoblin that was coated in nightwolf fur. He had a crown that seemed like a mixture of orichalcum and nightwolf bones. He also had a necklace that combined the fangs and claws of night wolves. This important-looking hobgoblin was fatter than the rest, and he was much bigger. Ray determined that this was because he had access to more food than the rest, hence making him much stronger than the rest. He's their chief, and right now, he's sneering at me. The hobgoblin chief raised the scepter in his hand, a stick made from orichalcum, with a night wolf monster core sitting on top of it. They can harvest monster cores too. Impressive. Considering the current numbers of the night wolves, Ray could tell that the hobgoblins would have had the chance of harvesting a lot of monster cores. Depending on how long they had domesticated the night wolves, Ray could imagine the hobs possessing thousands of cores. If I can have them, it'll be epic as hell. Ray began to grow more motivated with each passing second. It seemed the hobgoblin chief noticed his smile, because the next thing he did was to grunt loudly. Greek. All of the hobs straightened up and tightly gripped their weapons the moment they heard this. It seemed the chief was telling them something. Skreek guuujkaudi crick. The hobgoblins had depraved expressions on their faces, and their mouths began to water soon after. Did he just tell me that they'll feast on my body? Thanks to being an otherworlder, he could somewhat understand the general idea of what the hobgoblins meant. It wasn't like their words could be translated word for word with English, but Ray got the message regardless. These things were savages, and their bloodlust was the real deal. Any mistake he made here could cost him his life. Scree! The moment the chief yelled this, pointing his staff at Ray, all the armed hobgoblins roared and raised their weapons. Skayua-ri-ee. Ray could feel the air tremble, so he prepared himself for the inevitable. Here they come. Tilda rumble, Tilda. The horde of hobgoblins rushed to Ray in full assault. Saliva rushed from their open mouths as they roared and chanted in words that Ray could not fully comprehend. According to his knowledge, regular hobgoblins didn't have any particular skills. Perhaps special variants of goblins, like goblin mages and goblin champions, did, but not the foot soldiers. Hobgoblins were simply stronger, more durable, and more agile versions of goblins. They were much smarter too. I shouldn't take any chances, Ray whispered to himself as he raised one of his arms up in the air. Flare. Tilda shwinnnggggg. Tilda. The instant he said that, a bright ball of light emerged from his palm and shot up to the ceiling. Right before it touched the stony walls above, however, the ball exploded into a brilliant display of pure light. Cree quadruple AAC. In this floor, where darkness was the natural state of affairs for everyone, a mere glimpse of illumination was sure to stun the residents. However, Ray didn't settle for a simple flicker of light, or a small display of luminescence. Instead, he sent forth a flare that filled the world with such brightness that it seared through the extremely sensitive eyes of the hobgoblins. The result, absolute blindness. Kriak. As Ray heard their howls and screams of pain, he undid the blindness skill he had inflicted on himself. Thanks to that, he wasn't affected by the sudden flare. Looks like you're all in agony. Ray found himself chuckling for some reason. Looking at the creatures that desired to eat him now stumbling in the darkness felt amusing to him. ZTTTZZZ. He slightly arched his hand, and a sudden burst of lightning appeared on it. Let me ease your pain. Ray applied the Greater Warrior's mantle to buff himself, while also increasing the intensity of the lightning formed by his Greater Lightning Magic skill. As his body grew in strength and speed, he readied his legs for an epic sprint. Let's go. Whoosh. Ray swiftly moved, almost as if he was the wind itself. The lightning on his hand caused the very air to vibrate, and the feeling as he sped towards the confused crowd was electrifying. Before a single hob could recognize what had happened, Ray dealt the first strike to them. KRIZZZ. Lightning burned through their skin as he sliced off the heads of the goblins before him. Their weapons did them no good since they didn't know where to direct him to. Seeing in the dark was one of their major advantages, and now it was gone. Without their sight, they could only poke at random areas, unable to properly sense their enemy. Unfortunately for them, since they were huddled in a group, their careless strikes ended up doing more harm than good. Guak. Kree. Kuar. The hobgoblins screamed in pain as they began harming one another in a desperate attempt to kill the human invader. As squishing sounds reverberated across the vast space, and blood flowed from the bodies of the hobgoblins, Ray kept up his own assault. Cutting through the horde proved easier than he expected. Sure, the hobgoblins had orichalcum armor, but it didn't protect their necks from being sliced through. They could not resist. They could only helplessly await the demise. FWOOSSH. Once Ray got to the center of the hobgoblin crowd. Thanks to his deft maneuver and superior speed, he jumped to the air, gaining the perfect view from above the hobs. BZZTTTZZZ. At this point, both of his palms were cackling with lightning, and he was grinning like a maniac. The horrid smell of feces had now been replaced with burning flesh and sizzling blood. Ray seemed to prefer this aroma. Lightning rain. As Ray cast the spell, he directed his hands downwards. FWOOSHH. Flashes of electricity burst from his fingertips, causing them to dance around the powerless hobs. ZZZTTZ. Lightning pierced through the heads and necks of the hobs. KRIACK. Intense electricity, and the heat generated from it, eventually caused the orichalcum armor the hobgoblins proudly donned to overheat and explode. TZZZTT. More flashes of lightning descended from above, randomly targeting the hobgoblins and striking them down where they stood. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, Ray laughed in amusement. Kriak, the voice of the hobgoblin chief suddenly echoed. His tone was aggressive, but it had a tinge of desperation etched within. The chief pointed upward, roaring and groaning in pure fury. Ah, seems he noticed I'm right above them. Ray's eyes widened slightly. In response to their chief's commands, the hobgoblins raised their blades and spears and did the only reasonable thing they could do in such a situation. They threw their weapons into the air, hoping they would at least be able to hit the being that reduced their numbers to such an absurd degree. Whoosh. Blades sliced through the air, and while most were off by a wide margin, a few flew towards Ray himself. However, phase. He easily passed through the attacks that were directed at him. Mana-infused attacks or refined orichalcum would have affected the phase skill, but this is nowhere near that level. Once the first volley of their attack was complete, Ray resumed his slaughter. Tilde B Z Z Z Z Z Z Z Z Z T T T Z Z Z tilde. Die, die, D. Ray realized he sounded like a maniac, and the honest truth was that he didn't know why. Was this a result of the pent-up stress he had been holding on for a very long time? For a month now, he had been hiding his true nature and abilities from his classmates. He felt so suffocated that it was sickening. It was only in here, at moments like this, that he felt truly free. Perhaps that had driven him to the edge of insanity. Or maybe, he had always been this crazy. Either way, Ray could not deny the honest truth. I'm having so much fun. And he didn't want it to end. Ellipsis, not yet. G. Jerick. In Hobgoblin tongue, that meant, monster. This was the only word that came to the mind of the Hobgoblin chief as he heard the deaths of his people. Dozens of hobgoblins being slayed in a single moment. And the voice of their annihilator echoing in depraved laughter as he inflicted an unjust punishment. Just what did he and his people do to deserve this? For the 7 months that he had been the chief of the hobgoblins, they had encountered nothing but peace and prosperity. Within a month or two, he would finally be able to rest and join his ancestors in the earth. Yet, this had to happen in his lifetime, in this own tenure of rulership. Why? The fables of the Hobgoblin Society told of a time when they were the prey of the night wolves. But thanks to the leadership of the great Koku Ka, the Hob chief at the time, they were able to turn the tables around. It took several generations of Hobgoblin chiefs, but they were finally able to conquer this land of darkness for themselves. These events happened so long ago that only stories existed of them. The Hobgoblins now only knew peace and prosperity. And the only reason they hadn't lost their touch of combat was due to the contests that were frequently held, once every month. If it hadn't been for that, the Hobgoblins would have all grown fat and lazy. The Hobgoblin chief was initially grateful that they didn't abandon their culture. He thought their training would finally be put to good use against the invader. But now he thought differently. Not only was their training rendered useless in this entity's presence, but his powers were something that no hobgoblin could ever hope to attain. Not even the great Koku Ka. If this was how things were going to be, then wouldn't it have been better to have enjoyed themselves to the fullest? They should have all gotten fat and lazy. At the very least, that would mean they got to enjoy the little time they had left until their inevitable annihilation. Goo. The Hobgoblin chief noticed that the echoes and screams had ceased. That meant the last of the warriors had fallen. It was all over. Since he could not see, he could only wait for his turn to come. He trembled as he sat on his throne, his palms sweaty as he struggled to maintain his grip on his scepter. He had no idea why he stubbornly clung to his position when everything was going to disappear soon. The little ones and women were locked in the other room. Since they could not participate in war, they had to be sheltered from all of it. Hobgoblins did not particularly discriminate when it came to warfare. But there were pragmatic reasons why children and women could not be allowed to fight. Children were too weak and unintelligent to be of any use. Instead, they would be liabilities. They hadn't been trained in weaponry, and their muscles were yet to develop, so they could not properly wield any weapon. As for the women, hobgoblins constantly bred, so they were constantly pregnant. All the women in the tribe had children in their wombs. Once they gave birth, they would be impregnated once again. For the future of the tribe, that was the custom. As a result, the 300 more hobgoblins in the room were the future of their people. Unfortunately, they were doomed to die. Not at the hands of the Annihilator, he would never find them, but due to starvation or some other unfortunate means. Unless a group of adult hobgoblins rolled the stone that blocked the exit from outside, all of them would be trapped inside. He was the only adult left, and he doubted he could push the stone boulder himself. In the end, the children and women only had one option: to feed on one another as their ancestors did in the past, while breeding constantly to stay alive. The hobgoblin chief found this to be terribly barbaric. They had already evolved past that, so it was a descent of shame for his people to indulge in such an abomination. However, he would still prefer for them to do that than to die out. The hobgoblin chief thought about his own children, and his 5 mates. He personally wanted him to live no matter the cost. Squelch. He felt his flesh rip open and his blood gush out along with his entrails. It didn't even take a second before he was on the brink of death. That single second of agony felt like hell for him, but thankfully it didn't last for too long. Jigariki-da. Those were the last words the hobgoblin chief uttered before breathing his last in a pool of his own blood and guts. In hobgoblin tongue, it meant, the end has come. And he couldn't have been more correct. Asterisk. Looks like they're all dead, Ray muttered as he looked around to see the corpses of over 300 hobgoblins. This is awful. A sigh of sadness and pain escaped his lips as he witnessed the horror he had wrought. However, Ray didn't feel bad because he had just massacred an entire tribe of hobgoblins. He did so for a completely different reason. I'll have to pick up all those monster cores. It was really tedious to do, and he didn't want to have to engage in such mundane, time-wasting activities. As his human brain tried to figure out a way out of this problem, he suddenly had an idea. Hold on, I could just use them. Who were them that Ray referred to? Well, they were none other than the group of women and children that were trapped behind the stone boulder right behind the hobgoblin chief's throne. Ray had already detected them during the course of his fight with the hobgoblin horde, and he could easily roll over the stone to gain access to them. In the end, it appeared that the problem solved itself. They can help me pick up the cores. Gurik K Kanika. Once all the women and children hobgoblins saw the corpses of their men, they bowed and pleaded with the Annihilator to spare their lives. They already knew they could not win. As they trembled in fear, the one who had caused such destruction gazed upon them with benevolence. Of course, I'm not going to kill them, Ray thought to himself. If he did that, how was he any different from a mindless monster? Even hobgoblins have enough sense to spare their enemies and domesticate them. How can I display any lesser level of intelligence? Right now, Ray already had a training spot in the 6th floor. He only descended to the 7th for some EXP, and also to test out his skills. And I think I've been able to make sufficient progress for now. Killing off the rest of the hobgoblins would be a waste. Instead, I should leave them here so they can just repopulate and produce more adults for me to kill later on. Hobgoblin adults gave more EXP, so the only ones worth killing at all were the women. But women were necessary for producing more hobgoblins, so eliminating them would be foolish on his part. Hobgoblins have a very fast birth rate, and they also grow pretty quickly. Within a month, he would be able to see tons more adult hobgoblins. The only reason there aren't any more hobs present is because a lot of these kids die pretty early thanks to disease. And even the most healthy hobgoblin adult doesn't live past a year. Ray couldn't do anything about the latter, since it was simply the biology of goblins. They had an extremely short lifespan. However, he knew precisely where to start from when it came to the disease aspect. For one, good hygiene. He looked at the pile of feces and cringed once more. I'll have to burn all of that and teach them how to do the same. All they had to do was gather the feces to a secluded area and burn them. Perhaps also teaching them how to burn their meat before eating it would also help. Striking orichalcum together generates fire. They can use that to cook or roast their meat. The more Ray thought about the problems facing the hobgoblins, the more he developed solutions for them. Of course, this wasn't due to his kind-hearted nature or anything. He just wanted more returns for his investment. At the end of the month, I should have at least 3 times more than the initially expected hobgoblin adults. Small changes like these aided a lot when it came to these things. Ray could see a few hobgoblin children peeking at him as he considered a bunch of factors. He had to admit, they were pretty cute things. But he was able to recognize that even lion cubs had the same qualities, but would end up becoming apex predators that tore through their prey without mercy. If I was weaker than him, these cute ones would be feasting on my flesh by now. Such was the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. He didn't particularly think it was right, but he also had no way to say it was wrong. This was just how things were. I was brought to this world. I might as well survive in it. That was his current philosophy. Ray clapped his hands, causing all the groveling hobgoblins to jump in fright. They all gave him desperate stares, but fortunately for them, Ray only made this sound to get their attention. He pointed at the corpses of the dead hobgoblins and then used force to attract a hobgoblin that was closer to him. The hobgoblin corpse easily swept through the air and landed in his grasp. Many of the onlookers gasped in shock. They had never seen such an ability displayed before. And while many of them had fear embedded in their eyes, most also had expressions of admiration within their innocent gaze. As children, hobgoblins grew to respect their parents and other adults due to the strength they displayed. Right now, they didn't have parents to show them power, and what they were currently seeing far surpassed the meager strength they had previously experienced. As a result, many of the children quickly respected Ray more than they did their parents. It was a puzzling sight, really. I guess they really don't understand what death really means since they're kids, Ray thought as he noticed these minute details. He could imagine human babies making the same mistake, though in different circumstances. Let's just show them what they need to do. Ray knew the women would catch on quicker, so he made sure he focused on the adult goblins when making his presentation. He dug his unoccupied hand into the corpse that he tightly held, causing stale blood to spurt out instantly. Once he did so, he removed his hand and brought out a glowing red stone from within it. A monster core. Ray dropped the core on the ground, and alongside it many sacks. He pointed at the other corpses and used sign language to tell the hobs what he wanted while pointing at the sacks. They should understand what I mean. What he wanted was simple. The hobgoblins should do the harvesting for him and put all the monster cores into the sacks he had provided. It was pretty simple. One of the female goblins swiftly moved and reached out to the corpse of a random hobgoblin beside her. She took hold of one of the weapons that was lying on the ground and used it to stab the chest of the dead hob. Tilde squelch, tilde. Tilde squish, tilde. Tilde quelch, tilde. She did this multiple times, until finally the maimed flesh was torn into multiple pieces. She then dug her hand inside the body and brought forth the monster core that Ray desired. The moment Ray saw this, he smiled broadly, nodding vehemently. He then pointed at the sack, and the hobgoblin woman proceeded to open the sack and dropped it inside. Oh ho, they're pretty sharp. Ray had expected him to simply drop it on the sack, at least, on their first try, but the hobgoblin lady exceeded his expectations. Let's hope they're all this sharp. Ray nodded once again, smiling as he approached the hobgoblin woman. He could see her trembling, the exact reaction that the other hobs had for every movement he made. He ignored their fear and simply patted the head of the hobgoblin woman, who perfectly followed his instructions. Her bald head was the same as any hobgoblin, and to be honest, she resembled the males to a fault. The only difference between the females and males was the bulb on the stomachs of the former. Ray couldn't even imagine how the two sexes would look beside each other if the women weren't pregnant. Maybe that's a hidden reason why the goblins ensure their females constantly remain pregnant. That way they can tell which is which. Ray knew this was a terrible time for a joke, but he couldn't help chuckling a little as he thought of such a scenario. Okay, that's enough fun for now. He pointed at the rest of the corpses, and the rest of the hobgoblins sprang into action. The kids were, of course, more sluggish than their adult counterparts, but they moved regardless. See, they're so obedient and efficient. Ray smiled as he thought to himself. He would never have gotten this far if he had just killed all of them. Now then, on to the other matter. Now then. Ray walked away from the hobgoblin bunch and left them to their duties while he explored something else he had noticed in the process of fighting the hobs and freeing the rest. It was an opening that led somewhere else. I'm curious. One of the reasons for that was because the place was open. That meant it had to be available to the general populace. Other than that, it was also glowing a little, so that meant it had to be special. Let's check it out. Ray smiled as he approached the entrance. He had to bend a little since it wasn't originally designed to fit a human. However, all things considered, the experience wasn't too uncomfortable. The closer Ray approached the end of the hallway, he could sense what awaited him was. Don't tell me, no way. His eyes widened, but he quickly squinted them thanks to the light that radiated from the end. Finally, Ray reached the end of the hallway and emerged into another massive clearing. He. Ray slowly opened his eyes, ensuring he acclimated well to the light as he took in the ambience that greeted him. Ha. As his eyes now flickered open, he graced his sight with piles of monster cores. Ha. His laughter echoed throughout the great clearing, and his eyes could not stop shedding tears as he watched the immense stockpile of monster cores. It was insane. There's at least hundreds of thousands of them here. They were in so many piles, and it was crazy just how abundant they were. I expected him to have kept a lot of night wolf monster cores, but not to this extent. This was unbelievable. Monster cores didn't expire, so they could last for years upon years. Ray could only imagine how hobgoblin civilizations had come and gone to be able to produce something of such magnitude. The more he calculated, the more his head hurt. What do they even use these things for? I have to know. Ray beamed. I should call one of them over to explain this to me. ***********. I see. Ray's tone teetered between disappointment and an underlying expectation. I should have known. His thoughts trailed as he watched the hobgoblin he called interact with the monster cores. Hobgoblins are smart, but not that smart. The hobgoblin in front of him was lying down on the monster cores and closing her eyes, pretending to be sleeping. This place is their resting spot. That's what she's telling me. Apparently, it got crazy cold in the night, and hobgoblins derived a lot of warmth from the monster cores. As a result, this entire clearing made for a very comfortable bedroom. They were warm by sleeping among the piles of monster cores. And since they had to close their eyes when sleeping, the goblins weren't bothered by the light. Before approaching the room, they would put on blindfolds and enter. Once morning arrived, they would leave the room before taking off their blindfolds. The more Ray learned, the more he nodded his head, but also shook his head in disappointment. If only these guys knew how to refine, or even directly absorb the energy that is stored within those cores, they could have become much stronger than they are now. It was a shame that they didn't think of doing any of that. Well, I think it's only a matter of time. If they were under some kind of major threat, they would have figured it out eventually. Necessity was the mother of invention, after all. Thanks to their considerably comfortable lifestyle, they never really thought of the cores as anything else. This was all pretty amusing for Ray, but it also caused him to reflect. Right now, I have a lot of power. If I let myself be complacent, I could become like these guys. Once someone got to the top of the food chain, they ended up losing sight of what made them rise to that position in the first place. I can't let that happen to me. He had to keep improving, grinding, all so he wouldn't eventually be stomped down by some supreme power that he could not resist. The last thing he wanted was to become like the very hobgoblins he had conquered. All right, you can go back now. Ray tapped the hob and saw her fidget slightly. Apparently, she wasn't pretending to be asleep at all. She was actually sleeping. What the foo? Asterisk, 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 asterisk. All right, I should be leaving now. The hobgoblins had successfully packaged all the monster cores for him, and he had taken as many monster cores from their depository as he could carry. It'll take me at least a few weeks to clear out all those cores. By that time, he could show the hobs how to use fire, so they would no longer need the monster cores for warmth. I could make a fortune with all these monster cores. He could feel himself salivate internally. However, he had to control himself. Everything would come to him in due time. He just had to be patient. Before Ray left, he made sure to burn the feces for the hobgoblins, completing the first step in his restructuring plan. It'll take some time for me to fully breed them, but so far so good. Since it was already getting pretty late, however, Ray decided to leave things the way they were. I'll be back tomorrow. Take care until then. Ray waved his hand at the hobgoblin group. Surprisingly, they waved back at him. Ah, these guys. They were all his prey, so it felt a bit uncomfortable for them to treat him this way. He chose to ignore them and floated off. If this was some anime or manga, perhaps I could be their friend and even develop their society for the greater good. However, this was real life. Monsters were monsters. And he was an otherworlder, brought to this world for one reason alone: to kill monsters and grow strong enough to challenge the ultimate monsters, the dragons. Ray knew he could not allow himself to grow soft at this point. He had to keep growing stronger. That's the only way to guarantee my own survival. Alicia White flipped the pages of the book she was reading, silently consuming the information within it. As her eyes teetered across each letter, every word, she could see all the information she desired to understand. Still, for some unknown reason, she could not grasp it. Looks like my mind is wandering again, Alicia thought to herself. After reading for hours without end, it seemed she had finally arrived at her saturation point for the day. It's around 7 p.m. already. Maybe I should take a break. As she sighed and closed the book that she read, a small sigh echoed from her lips. She glanced around and noticed that no one was present in the library but her. Times like these felt lonely, but also somewhat comforting. There were no eyes to glare at her, or no mouths to bash her. It's not so bad. The moment she had this thought, the doors to the library creaked open, and someone entered. The moment she heard this, Alicia swiftly carried her book and shoved it in her face, as if she had been reading this entire time. He's here, her thoughts echoed as she tried her best not to peek behind the pages of her book. Pretending to be so immersed in reading, she kept her eyes locked on the texts therein. Hi, Alicia. The moment she heard the very familiar, but awkward voice, Alicia straightened up and slowly looked up from her book. As expected, she found Ray standing right next to her. Oh, hi Ree. What are you reading? He suddenly drew nearer as his face closed in on hers. Did he just take a shower? He smells nice. Her thoughts echoed as she tried her best not to look directly at him. Let's just pretend I'm reading, and... Your book is upside down, Alicia. Are you sure you're okay? Hey. At this point, she had no point but to look at Ray, and then turned to see that her book was indeed upside down. She had been in such a hurry to act like she was serious that she didn't realize such a simple blunder. How embarrassing, her thoughts echoed, mortified by the experience. But what more could she do at this point? How could she salvage this situation? I know. I was trying to see if I could understand it upside down. There's a chance that a hidden message could be located underneath. It was a flimsy excuse that she came up with under the spot, but Alicia really hoped it helped her save face. Oh, I see. I have heard of some kinds of writings that reading them normally and upside down bring out different meanings. Alicia didn't know if Ray was just trying to make her feel better about her mistake, or if he genuinely thought she was being serious. But, since the ball was already rolling, she stuck to it. Precisely, you get it. There was no other choice but this. Ray was smiling, and so was she. It seemed like they both understood her blunder, but chose to keep it under wraps. Well, it was better this way. Got any recommendations for me today? Ray backed away slowly, his voice still the constant in their conversation. Yeah, sure. Got any idea of what you would like to read? Or should I just choose randomly? After the both of them had spoken about 2 weeks ago, Alicia and Ray's library relationship had somewhat gotten a bit stronger. They now spoke to each other, and more often than not Ray would ask for recommendations. It was a little awkward initially, but Ray seemed to be getting more and more assertive as the days went by. Alicia had no idea where he was getting his confidence from. But the Ray that she knew when they first arrived in this world was vastly different from the one beside her. His personality had changed. From being a dreary, sad-looking person, he was now more like a mysterious persona who intentionally refused to associate with anyone around him. The only person he consistently spoke to was Alicia, and she preferred it that way. His physique has also taken a huge boost. I don't know what training they're doing in the beta group, but it's definitely working. Ray usually wore baggy clothes, so it wasn't very easy to see his muscle tone and well-defined biceps. among other major improvements, but Alicia was very observant. She could pick things up over time, and right now, she could tell he was very jacked underneath his current oversized hoodie. I wonder why he's like this, though. She thought guys like him would try vying for a position among the popular kids, seeing how he had improved greatly since coming to this new world. Sure, his abilities weren't too impressive, but his current physique was impressive in her opinion. He's also not terrible looking. He's definitely above average. More importantly, he was pretty chill to be around. So why was he not talking to anyone else? Why did he only come to the library and speak to her? Maybe I'm just overthinking things. I'm always cooped up here, so maybe he actually had friends I don't know about. The moment Alicia had this thought, she sighed and nodded. Hey, Alicia, did you hear anything I said? Ray's voice woke her from her torrents of thoughts, and she instantly felt a wave of shock flow through her as a result. She sharply turned in his direction, and her face nearly touched his thanks to him being very close to her. "AR." His gaze was intent as he stared straight into her eyes, and she could feel a strange weight placed on her mind. What did you say?" She quickly looked away. It felt like her heart was racing for a second there, but now it was perfectly fine. "I was asking if you've read any books on goblins, specifically hobgoblins. I've only read about them in the General Monster Encyclopedia." Oh, that's quite a specific topic," Alicia muttered, rubbing her chin slightly. Thankfully, she had the ability to switch from embarrassed to serious if the situation called for it. "Why, yeah, I need it for reasons." Once again, Ray was being mysterious. Alicia didn't know whether to like his current personality or find it a little discouraging for her. She wanted to know more about his plans, and what he was hiding, but she didn't know how to phrase it without seeming like a busybody. "If I'm too forward, he might think of me like a prude." That was the way most of her classmates viewed her, despite most of her actions being geared towards the greater good of everyone. I don't want him to dislike me too." As a result, Alicia decided not to speak on the matter despite her fervent curiosity. "A book on goblins and hobs, huh?" she mumbled, slowly rising from her seat. A smile formed on her face as she stared at Ray with an official, yet friendly, demeanor. "I think I have just the thing for you." "Damn, she's good." Ray flipped open the book on goblins, one that had an entire chapter dedicated to the hobgoblins. Alicia had given him exactly what he was looking for. "I should have started talking to her from day one. She's very useful." Ray smiled as he went over the book. The girl known as Alicia White was someone he never thought he would really speak to. They had actually attended the same middle school, same as Billy, but Ray didn't think she would remember that detail. They were mostly strangers, even in high school. It was only fairly recently that they started speaking, and from what he could see, she was a very nice person. Why are so many rumors flying around lately? She's clearly not that kind of person. Of course, Ray had no intention of actively defending Alicia the way Billy would. The both of them had an understanding, and their relationship did not extend beyond the four walls of the library. If he went out of his way for her, she might not even appreciate it. Now that I think of it, I don't even know anything about her. She did smell nice, though. That was one thing Ray knew for a fact, and the fact that she was extremely intelligent was a plus. Honestly, I can see myself falling for her if I'm not careful. Fortunately, Ray didn't plan on that happening. Right now, he only had one mission. I need to grind. Such things like love were only allowed for the strong. It served as a distraction to the current Ray, who still felt inadequate in many areas. Besides, looking at Alicia, she's obviously of a different spec. She had dated Adonis in the past, and after that, she even went ahead to date other seniors, at least, according to what he heard. Ray didn't know how accurate that information was, but he could still draw his conclusions that girls like Alicia didn't fall for boys like him. I'm average in looks, I'm not very good socially, and I'm considered weak by everyone. What was there to like about him? I'm just going to save myself the embarrassment and forget all about it. He didn't stand a chance at all, and he was also too busy with getting stronger. These two factors made romance, especially with Alicia, not too viable. Rather than focusing on such futile things, Ray submerged his thoughts into the book in his hand. Interesting. As he studied more about the morphology of hobgoblins, as well as their immense adaptive capabilities, indomitability, and high compatibility with monster cores, Ray felt a smile forming on his face. I was right. If those guys had consumed the monster core, they would have become much more advanced than they are now. Ray began to wonder if he should seal off their sleeping area as soon as possible. That way, there wouldn't be a chance of them eating of the forbidden fruit. Or, should I let them consume the monster core and see just what they become? Ray was genuinely curious, because from what he was reading here, the length of hobgoblin evolution was currently non-conclusive. Studies were currently being made on him, but due to the dragon situation and economic crisis, so much research had been suspended or shut down. Manpower, both physical and intellectual, has been diverted to address the dragon incursion. That was why there weren't any proper clear squads that actively challenged the royal dungeon and opened up more floors. The nation could not risk any casualties, and most soldiers had been posted to various places to guard them. The head warrior and grand mage remained the only competent forces left in the capital. The old geezers that they encountered at the beginning had gone to their respective towers, preparing for invasions or warding off their enemies. Everyone was fighting in the front lines, waiting for the turn of their saviors to come. Even the royal estate has very few guards, and their shifts are for long hours. Ray could already recognize every single guard in the estate, and they weren't more than 50. It was that bad. It says here that hobgoblins have a very strong tendency to deify the strong, which is why their culture is built around the absolute command of the chief. Ray smiled, having experienced this whole thing play out himself. At least, with this piece of information, it was clear that the hobgoblins wouldn't betray him or disobey his orders. It honestly feels like such a waste to kill them. I could do more research on them. They were the only monsters he had met that could intelligently relate with him. Plus, the conditions for research were mostly present. I'm currently on level 15. I still want to raise my level some more, but I'm not in a hurry to do that. Besides, didn't he still have about a month before the next batch of hobs would be ready for harvesting? I can conduct sufficient research on him during that period. That was the most optimal solution he could find. It's unfortunate that I didn't receive any skills from him, though. Perhaps the night wolves would have some skills, but if the hobgoblins could take them down, orichalcum or not, then they couldn't possibly be that strong. I shouldn't raise my hopes up, but it's still worth checking out. Right now, he needed to amass as much strength as he could. I got 18 new stat points from my fight with the goblins. I know what I'm investing all of them in. There was only one reasonable choice, mana. Status window, Ray thought to himself. Status window. Name, Ray Skylar. Race, human, otherworlder. Class, commoner, F tier. Level, 15, 11.98% XP. Life Force, 22. Mana level, 63. Combat ability, 30. Stat points, 0. Skills, exclusive, doppel. Skills, non-exclusive, nil. Alignment, neutral. Additional information. You possess the weakest class, but the strongest skill. You can only be described as an overpowered weakling. End of information. Alright, this looks neat enough. If he could reach keep grinding, it was possible to finally push his mana into the triple digits. If I can achieve that, then the other aspects of my stats won't be an issue. Ray felt good as he was learning and also getting stronger. I can't wait for tomorrow. Good morning, everyone. Sir Brutus won't be around, so I'll be the one directing your martial arts class today. The shock written on everyone's face as they stared at the person speaking was priceless. No one could have expected this outcome, so they could only gawk in surprise. Adonis is busy with the Alpha group, so I guess you'll have to settle for me. The one who said this, with a bright smile on his clear face, was none other than Billy Maguire. Apparently, both Head Warrior Brutus and Grand Mage Luciel would be away for the next few days. And there was no one left to teach the students, so they had to teach each other. When it was first announced, everyone had thought training would be suspended for the duration of their teacher's absence. How wrong they were. This is a joke, right? Why do you have to teach us? You're practically our classmate. As expected, Adam flared upon rage. It seemed like he had been waiting for a moment like this where his anger would be justified. Several other students agreed with Adam, but the majority were silent. I also do not approve of this. It feels a bit condescending. This time, Trisha's voice took dominance over the entire space. Her ebony skin glimmered under the hot sun, and her long, braided hair trailed behind her as she made her presence known. She was undoubtedly the strongest student in the beta class. And the fact that Adam didn't say anything once she stepped forward proved how much influence she held. Can't we just train by ourselves? If we get the instructions, we can follow through. We don't need you, Alpha, students coming to tell us what to do. Her fierce frown caused Billy to raise his hands a little, trying to be diplomatic about his approach to the whole thing. Hey, I wasn't the one responsible for this arrangement, okay? The directive came from our tutors themselves. This obviously meant one thing, that the Alpha students had advanced so far that they could serve as temporary tutors. The very thought of this made a lot of beta students grit their teeth in suppressed envy. You didn't hear this from me, but there's going to be a joint session coming up soon. I think it's advantageous to take advantage of this opportunity and see what we, Alpha, students can do. Billy's smile was calm, but there was something oddly condescending in his tone. Trisha noticed it instantly and frowned a little. However, despite her distaste for Billy, she could not deny the advantages his presence implied. By letting Billy teach, they could study how much the Alpha students had advanced, and the gap that currently existed between them. If he was right about the joint session, then the beta class couldn't afford to slack off and be left behind. Sure, they weren't as powerful as the Alpha students, but they had been working extremely hard for a month now. TCH, fine, Trisha muttered, turning her back on Billy as she returned to the rest of the group. Teach us, then. Hey, I didn't agree to this. Adam's voice suddenly surged forth in resistance. He had a desperate expression, as if he was trying to both obtain attention and flex his own minuscule influence within the beta group. Even though it was smaller than Trisha's by a wide margin, he still had his own squad. Who are you to give permission on behalf of the entire? Shut up, Adam, Trisha snapped, glaring at him with apparent bloodlust. The moment she did so, Adam stopped flapping his lips and grew stiff. Her intense gaze on him was more than enough to overpower his ambitious stance. Whatever, he muttered as he looked away. Of course, he would never admit defeat. However, to everyone present, they already knew. Adam was the loser. Thanks for quelling the rebellion, Trisha. It's much appreciated. Billy's words grew bolder as his smile widened. He seemed to be enjoying every moment of this. I didn't do it for you, Trisha responded, her arms folded. As her pitch-black hair danced behind her, she narrowed her eyes on Billy. Let's just begin. Her objective was simple: learn as much from the alpha student and improve drastically based on what was studied. Trisha would do anything to grow stronger, even if it meant learning under someone like Billy. I just have to be patient and observant. As her thoughts trailed, an internal smile appeared. Let's see how strong you are. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Several moments later, as the group of students lay sprawling on the floor, Trisha's widened eyes were fixed on the grinning opponent before her. Her vision blurred, but she tightly held her two daggers regardless of how nauseated she felt. With her muscles aching, and sweat constantly dripped from her ebony skin, she had no choice but to revise her earlier thoughts on Billy. No, the alpha class as a whole. I was wrong. As her thoughts trailed, she made a few heavy sighs while maintaining proper form. He's strong, stronger than I expected. It wasn't just due to his powerful skills, but the way he expertly used them. His base strength and speed was incomparably superior to hers, and it seemed like he could read all her moves too easily. How did he advance so much? It's only been a month. Trisha's parents were expert martial artists back on Earth, and her father was even a pro. She had joined many clubs that focused on martial arts and sports. Both within and outside school, back on Earth, growing stronger ever since she was a little girl. That was why she was able to easily adapt to this world. It wasn't just talent, but dedication and constant hard work. Yet, the skinny Billy that had no combat experience just some weeks prior now had enough skill and ability to utterly overwhelm her. How was that even fair? Damn it. Trisha gazed at all the students that were already on the ground. She was the last one standing. Damn it. Holding tightly to her dagger, Trisha inhaled deeply and dulled her exhaustion. I can't lose now. Tightly gritting her teeth, she raised both daggers and readied her body for action. I won't lose.